Do you want to learn how to buy your first rental property that can bring you passive income, cash flow, and appreciation? Well, in today's video, we're going to cover how you can buy your first rental property even if you have a 9-to-5 job. And we want to make this video because throughout the years, Ryan and I, we've had hundreds, if not thousands of people ask us, how the heck do you buy rental properties? How do you buy your first rental property if you got to work 40 plus hours a week and you have a 9-to-5 job? And so in today's video, we're going to cover exactly how Ryan was able to buy his first rental property. And we're going to talk about this property that was over 9 years ago that he acquired while having a demanding 9-to-5 job, how he's able to make it happen. And so Ryan, you ready to rock today?
Absolutely. I'm excited for this.
All right. So we're going to dive into the numbers on this deal. So get excited for that. You know, where Ryan bought the numbers at the day of and where they're at 9 years later. And just so you know, Ryan has over an 8-figure rental portfolio today. We co-own over a couple hundred rental units together. And for the last decade, we've been wholesaling, fixing and flipping, and buying rental properties. And if you want to learn a little more about how you can do that, how you can get started in real estate, check out our webinar that we hold every single week at realestateskills.com/webinar, where we'll dive into the ins and outs of generating an active income through wholesaling and flipping, and then reinvesting those profits to build a passive income through buying rental properties like we're going to cover today. So Ryan, take us back 9 years ago. Where were you? What were you doing for work? You haven't invested into your first property yet. What was your mindset like? Let's just get right into it.
Yeah, let's roll it back. 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college. You and I went to college together, and it's a very nostalgic time when I look back. I'm so grateful to be where I'm at today. I know you are too. And, it's great to reflect, to just see, hey, how did it all start? Where were we, almost a decade ago? And I know, we were both very ambitious individuals in college, just trying to figure out, what are we going to do? How are we going to make our dent in the universe? And, when I was kind of getting ready to leave college, my mindset was always get good grades, get an education and do really well in school. And at some point you're going to get a great job. And then from there, that was kind of it, that like what my parents taught me, what their generation always believed in was that was the model. Mm-hmm. And so when I was in that position, I didn't really have like a what was next. And so, I was just trying to look, where am I going to sink my teeth into? How am I going to continue the growth that I've experienced throughout my whole life? And so I was, at that time, last year of college was just trying to look for a job. I had some, startup endeavors in college, ultimately, trying different startups and different business ideas, going to business school. And so, there were a few different things kind of going for me, but I just said, hey, like I kind of need to go do the traditional thing that, my parents expect of me, that society kind of expects of me. And I'm in a position to do that. I got good grades. I'm in a good school. So I started applying to jobs. Mm-hmm. And, I had worked my whole way, through college and, even before that, ever since I was like 15, 16. So I was no stranger to work. But I just, I started applying to jobs and just going through that whole process. And, it was very demanding, very competitive, to get anything. So ultimately, I was able to get multiple offers and chose what I thought was the best one, which just so happened to allow me to stay in San Diego, and was with a company that pretty much everyone on this planet knows, which is PepsiCo. Mm-hmm. So I was able to do sales with Pepsi in San Diego, and to top it all off, I was offered a $60,000 salary starting. Yeah. So at the time, not sure kind of where starting salaries are, today, 10 years later, but for me, that was amazing. I felt like I hit the jackpot. Mm-hmm. So I was ecstatic. I thought that was the best offer ever, and went through a very rigorous interview to get there. So I was very grateful for it. And, long story short, after starting that position, after spending a few months in that role, and I can definitely explain more about what was the day-to-day, but I quickly realized that, that position, just being in the corporate world for such a massive company just was kind of a letdown. It just wasn't what I was expecting and what I felt like I had worked so hard to become. So, for a number of reasons, I felt like very out of place, and, I just wasn't that motivated to continue down that path and really just, build an empire, working for this big company. Yeah. So it was a challenging time. I know, you and I even lived together, during part of that phase, and it was, it was long days. It was pretty much 12-hour days consistently, Monday through Friday, 2 weeks vacation, and very, very minimal flexibility with the schedule. So just even to kind of like dive into like what that was, I had it was a sales job. It was a pre-sales representative, so I would be going to 10 to 12 different stores every single day in San Diego, in different parts of San Diego. So I would drive my own car to even sometimes an hour plus away, and then start my day, which was a full 10-hour day, going to 10 to 15 different stores, anything from a 7-Eleven to an AM/PM, a bunch of gas stations, sometimes even Walmarts, Rite Aids, some of the big box stores as well, Ralph's, Vaughn's. And I'd be managing the product in those stores, so checking in on the inventory of all of the soft drinks, all the Pepsi brands, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Gatorades, even Starbucks, Rockstar. So pretty much managing all of the product inventory in these stores and managing the relationships with those vendors, trying to get more shelf space, which is very competitive and very difficult, and just continuing to like restock and ordering more cases into the stores. And so it was challenging because, I couldn't really control how much people are actually buying of these products. It's just, there's lots of other marketing going on. There's not much control. And it was always just like, hey, you got to send more cases. Like, one of my managers was always just like, hey, send it. Just send it. So it was like, hey, they don't always need these cases. They're full. They've got cases in the back that are untouched, but it was just kind of like, hey, just keep sending. And then I'm the guy managing the expectation when all of a sudden they get a pallet of Gatorade that they didn't order or that they don't actually really need, but I'm the guy who's supposed to be sending it. Mm-hmm. So it was just kind of it wasn't exactly what I thought of when it came to like a sales role. Like I got into sales knowing that that's a very valuable skill set for a business person, an entrepreneur, for someone who wants to be successful in life. As you know, like sales is so important. You're always selling yourself. You're always selling in business, no matter what you're doing. So I wanted to get into sales, but this wasn't really a traditional sales role. So I felt like it wasn't really exercising, the sales skills that I felt like were really crucial to my own personal development. And beyond that, it was like the skills that I was expected to master and continue to grow to hit the quotas, to just excel in that role. I felt like it wasn't really going to serve me in my life beyond just that role. So really the expectation with those big companies, and I'm sure there's other types of roles. I had friends doing kind of the same thing in the wine industry and, for other like types of consumer packaged good companies. And it's not very transferable, and it's a very specific skill set. So I just didn't feel like I could continue to grow and like fulfill my potential at the end of the day by continuing to commit and put my blood, sweat, and tears into this role. And so I was ultimately just like unfulfilled and unhappy, relatively pretty quickly. But I'm not the kind of person that just throws in the towel. So I knew I wanted to give it at least a year and really see it through and just see if things would change, see if there's opportunity to move into different departments. So it was pretty much just like, I'm going to give it a shot. So I stuck it through, and, I just kept at it. And I eventually left after a year. But through that year, I started to ask questions. I started to ask questions because I was unfulfilled. I was selling sugar water at the end of the day. And so I'm sure a lot of other people might be in companies where they're just like, hey, maybe like I don't feel like I'm making a big impact in the world. I'm putting my energy in my one life that I have into building this company, which is, probably not your company. And it's, if you don't believe in the mission and you don't feel like you're making the world a better place, sometimes it's hard to really get behind. So that's how I felt. And, selling sugar water didn't really do it for me. I felt every weekend was every time Sunday came around, right? I had Friday night was a relief. Saturday, you got the full day. Come Sunday, I felt dread in my stomach every single Sunday. And I couldn't even enjoy myself because I knew that I had to wake up at 4:30 a.m., 5 a.m. just to get to the headquarters just for a 5 o'clock meeting, a 5:30 a.m. meeting, and then start my 12-hour day and come home, after dark. So, and that was every single day. Mm-hmm. So I just couldn't really enjoy those Sundays. I had dread in my stomach, and it was eating at me. So it really caused me to look elsewhere. Why real estate? How did I end up going there? Yeah. So when I started earning, this $60,000 salary, right, W-2 salary, it wasn't a 9 to 5, it was more like a 6 to 6, but I was earning this income, and I was like, great, I'm going to make $60,000 a year. When you get your paycheck, you see all these deductions, and at the end of the month, I was probably netting $3,000 a month, net pay take home, right? Because everything's going to taxes. So, from that, I realized, okay, well, how am I going to start saving for retirement? How am I going to figure my way out of here? Because this isn't what I want to do forever. This isn't going to allow me to, eventually retire, right? Because I thought, hey, the goal of working is to eventually retire. Yeah. So I started talking to their HR department, and I was like, hey, well, how do I do this 401k thing? How do I start investing? What's going on here? And they basically told me like, hey, you can put money into your 401k, but we can't tell you what to do with it. Like that's beyond our scope. Like you have to figure that out on your own. Mm-hmm. Like you can start putting in, a couple $100 a month, whatever you can. And you have to essentially figure out what to do with that money. So then I started thinking about investing, and I started looking into investing, and I started realizing that, some of the people that I knew that were making good investments were also in real estate, and were also buying rental properties and renting them out. I had some exposure to property management also in college. I was doing that kind of as a side gig and just to help pay my rent. So I was doing like some of the leasing turnovers just to make a little bit of side income. So it kind of planted the seed for me, but I never thought that was going to be, my way out. But really just through talking to mentors who had been successful in business and ultimately in real estate as well, through talking to guys like you, people in our network at the time, other entrepreneurs, people who are just trying to better themselves. Ultimately, I figured, real estate and business, whatever that business might be, was my ticket out. I knew I had to be an entrepreneur. I knew I had to get into business for myself and ultimately learn skills that I could create income and ultimately take control of my destiny instead of continuing to work and expecting to get that paycheck for the rest of my life. So that's when I decided to really take charge, and I started learning, consuming books, listening to people talking about real estate, going to networking events, going to real estate investing association meetings. And on my commutes every single day from store to store to, on these different routes, I would just be listening and just indoctrinating myself with real estate knowledge, real estate books, personal development. And eventually I started to just get the confidence to, eventually look into actually buying a property. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, where my mind was. And it was, again, like just this big buildup to getting that job, getting what a lot of people would say is like a huge success in your career, like getting that first big job, and just felt like it was a little bit hollow. It was a little bit empty. It wasn't me fulfilling my purpose and what I was put on this planet to do. So it caused me to look elsewhere.
Yeah. Man, I remember that as well. I remember that time period, and it was more than a 6 to 6 for you. I remember you waking up very early when it was dark, and then coming back when it was dark. And I think every morning you were out of the house by 5 a.m. or 4:30. It seemed like. I remember I couldn't play music too loud because Ryan's got to wake up early tomorrow for work. And I felt bad. I remember feeling bad, but you stuck to it. You were disciplined, and you've always been disciplined. One of the most disciplined people I know. And I know you brought that into real estate as well. So let's talk about, right, you're making $60K a year, but you're only netting $3K a month. Now, you're one of the most disciplined people I know. you're very good with your money. I've learned a lot from you on how to take care of your money, how to save up. There's a lot of people that are probably waiting to get their first rental property that are making more than $60,000 a year. We know these people making significantly more than $60,000. They think they don't have enough money. They think they don't have the time to invest in a real estate. So how the heck did you save up enough for a down payment? I think this is an opportunity for you, maybe just share about exactly what you did, because the principles that you've applied 9 years ago have allowed you to acquire so many more properties throughout the years too. But I'm just curious as a friend as well, what did you do to save? How did you go about that? What were your daily habits?
Yeah, so I think what's really powerful when you think about it like that is like I knew that my net pay. So I looked at what I was actually making at the end of the month or like every pay period. And then I thought about the hours I was putting in. I thought about the pain that I was feeling. I thought about the stress, the pressure, everything that I was doing. And then I looked at my net pay and I said, okay, well, that's what I'm really making per hour. So every dollar I spend is basically trading that time for whatever I'm buying. Mm-hmm. So, if we're going out and, even buying dinner, $20, like that for me was like, a couple hours of work, or whatever that equates to. And so for me, it was like, it really has to make sense to spend that money because I know what I'm sacrificing to afford certain things. So that was kind of my mindset of like every dollar I spend is basically just taking away from the time that I'm putting in. And I really felt every dollar I was making. So it wasn't just like, oh, I have this big sack of money and I'm ready to buy a property with. It was like, okay, well, I'm methodically like paying attention to every single penny that comes into my account because I know how hard I'm working to get that. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like how I had approached the money I was making. But then as far as like spending, I was just very meticulous about not spending. Yeah. So I paid attention to what are my expenses. I created a budget. I looked at, the rent. I looked at, the food I was paying for and just thought about ways to reduce that as much as possible. So, fortunately at that time, a single guy living in a, 4-bedroom, townhouse with 3 other guys and splitting the rent. So it was relatively, affordable. My lifestyle expenses were low, gas, food, and rent were obviously the big ones. So I was able to, keep that to a minimal, just didn't really go out and party a ton, and was just not going on vacations, wasn't really spending anything lavishly. So, and I would just spend, every night and weekend, reading and going to networking events and just trying to like fill my mind with ideas and potential, business plans to eventually escape, and get out of that 9 to 5, that 6 to 6. And because I knew that it was up to me to figure it out. Like I wasn't waiting for a promotion. I wasn't waiting for, another job. I mean, I was looking for other jobs kind of like towards the end of that. But, I ultimately decided to bet on myself, like kind of towards the end of that year I spent at Pepsi. I had another job offer. It's probably, $12,000, $15,000 more. But then I decided not to take that because I felt like it would be another, corporate grind. And then I said, hey, I'm going to bet on myself and I'm just going to go all in on entrepreneurship, on business, and, do something a little bit more outside the box, a little more unconventional, because I knew that would have a much bigger upside. And I knew time was of the essence. The more time you wait to take the leap and get into business, get into real estate, it's an opportunity cost. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of my approach. And I guess back to your question of how did I save? So I kept, my expenses probably to around $1,000 a month, right? It was rent, it was food, it was gas, and really just, maybe going out once in a while, but kept it as minimal as possible. And I just aggressively saved as much as I could. Did a little bit of like side work here and there just to make, whatever I could, doing some leasing and, turnovers and whatnot, that I already kind of had going for me. But, it was just save aggressively. Every dollar I didn't spend was a dollar that I could save and potentially figure my way out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I love how during this time period too, I mean, I know it was tough, but it was similar for me, right? When I was going to college, I started asking questions. What happens if I keep pursuing this path? And, so if anyone here is watching this asking questions, man, I don't really like the path I'm on. It's a good spot to be in, right? It's a catalyst for change. And I want to commend you for your relationship with money too, because I've heard you even say, you don't get excited spending money, you get excited saving money. And you have a very healthy relationship with money. And you've talked about it before. If someone's having issues being cash flow positive in their life today, they're probably going to have issues being cash flow positive on a rental property that they buy. They don't have good enough habits, financial habits today. And so I think that was step number one. You couldn't have saved up enough for a down payment unless you had that mindset that you were in. And that's how you were able to accomplish it, making $60,000 a year.
Totally. Yeah. And it's you can be making, $200,000 a year, $500,000 a year. But if you're spending what you're making, then you're basically in the same position at the end of every month. So you want to have as much in your savings or like at the end of the month, you want to be saving as much as possible because all of that can go towards buying assets. It can go to investing, and that's really what's going to help, any 9-to-5er get out of that position, right? Mm-hmm. It's not the promotions. It's not getting raises. We really have to take charge of our financial future, and it's just being very methodical and intentional with every dollar you're earning to ultimately be able to save. And I always like to say, treat your life like a business. Mm-hmm. Understand what's coming in and what's going out. And every business, the point of it, at least on the financial perspective, is to turn a profit. It's to have more income than expenses. Mm-hmm. So if you start to look at your life like that, then at least you develop the financial discipline that is equally translatable and important in investing and especially in rental properties. Because each property is like a business. You have your income, you have your expenses, and then you want to have some net cash flow. So that is how you are able to grow and keep the property and just create healthy profits in real estate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a great tip. I mean, it's the way I look at my business and my life. So the P&L statement at the end of the month. And okay, so 9 years ago, right? You're working hard. It kind of stunk. You're asking these questions. You had the foresight to know that, man, this probably isn't going to be the path for me, or I don't want to do this for the next 40 years. And you were saving. You're being frugal. You're being smart with your money. You were asking questions. You were talking to mentors. You were educating yourself. And then you gained the confidence to be able to at least think about investing in a real estate, right? And so as you're saving this nest egg, how'd you go about now taking that next step? You obviously then made a decision, I'm going to invest and buy my first rental property. And so now what was that next step of you're probably saving during this time, maybe you had enough, maybe you set a goal to save a certain amount. What was that next step after that?
Yeah, I mean, it was a big mountain to climb, knowing that I needed a big chunk of money, to invest in a property, right? And as you were saying that, I just remember, being on the routes, being behind the wheel, eating lunch while I'm driving, and doing whatever. I wouldn't even go to Subway. I'd go to Albertsons, grab a roll, and then I grab some bulk, tuna salad and just eat it like that. It was $2. So, and I'd take water. So, and that was my lunch. So I was like, all right, spend $10 or $2.
Yeah.
And it was nutritious, allowed me to, survive. I'm still here. So it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. But I just say that as an example of hey, sometimes you got to get resourceful and, just kind of strip things down to the essentials. Cause you can get creative and actually unlock big savings through these little habits that you can develop over time. So that's just kind of the level of commitment I had to it. And, ultimately, so when I started learning about, investing in real estate, I knew that I wanted to buy rental property, right? Because I had seen it work, for other people. I've had a friend, a couple friends growing up whose family was in real estate who seemed to be doing really well, and so I just kind of knew about it, but I didn't understand the math behind it. So once I started actually digging in to understand how to analyze a rental property and really seeing the numbers behind it, my eyes started opening up to say, hey, what if I bought one? What if I could actually acquire, one or two or 10? What would that do for me? Yeah. So I knew it was something I wanted to do and something that would work itself out long term. So I was like, hey, you know what? All this money I've saved, my whole life, just working these various jobs as a kid and saving, I don't really know anything about stocks. Like I'm not very versed in that. I'd bought a couple stocks here and there, a couple $100 here, a couple $100 there. And I had no idea what I was doing. But once I dove into real estate and I started understanding the fundamentals, I was like, wait, I actually am starting to understand this. Yeah. And I can see how you can create returns, and I could see how you could actually make money in real estate. And so, the riskiest thing you could do is invest in things you don't understand.
For sure.
So there's a lot of stuff out there that looks like it's a great return. I mean, honestly, even the stock market, it's very complex thing, and you have very little control over what's happening to your money. Mm-hmm. So I just liked, the idea of having more control, right? Control of my life, control of my time. I wasn't in control of my time, working that job. So, real estate just seemed to be the thing where I could control my money, I could control my time, I could build a business to where I could actually have the money flowing to me. I could build it as big as I want or as small as I want. So there's a lot of things that, led me to want to buy. So I knew that I don't have that much money in my bank account. I saved, like $20,000-$30,000 at the time. And so I knew I had to get a loan, right? I knew I had to get leverage. So started learning about mortgages, started, talking to real estate agents, just that I was connected through different family members, friends, and really just got introduced to a lender through a real estate agent and started looking at properties, started to just understand, what can I actually afford? So, I want to highlight this because this is such an important point that if someone's listening to this who has a W-2 job, who is an employee, especially if you've been there for a year, 2 years or more, the longer the better, that is such an important advantage that you have as a real estate investor because you can get some of the best loans possible. Mm-hmm. So I learned quickly that if you have a W-2 job, you can get financing to buy real estate. And it doesn't have to be your own primary residence. It can be an investment property. And so that was like a big aha moment when I realized, hey, I could take the money I'm saving, I could get a loan from a bank or a mortgage broker and then buy properties that are paying me every single month. And my mortgage payment every month would be more than covered by the rent of that property. Mm-hmm. So kind of just like simple concept, but it was just a big shift for me knowing that I could actually leverage the job that I had and all the hard work I was doing and take that to a lender. And then they would tell me, hey, we'll give you, $200,000. We'll give you $500,000 as a mortgage on a property. So that's when I got pre-qualified, I got pre-approved. And in order to do that, you have to share your W-2s, your pay stubs, your tax returns. They'll look at really everything. They'll look at your credit. So, getting a loan is sometimes a painful process in itself, but that it's so worth it. You're getting some of the cheapest money available. Beautiful thing about real estate investing is that you get access to some of the cheapest debt in existence. Mm-hmm. If you're a company, right? If you're a small company, you're borrowing at 2-3 times the interest rates as if you're buying a rental property, if you're buying a piece of real estate. So as mom and pop investors, as someone buying their first rental property, as someone who's building their portfolio from scratch, you have access to some of the best financing available. Mm-hmm. And not only are the rates great, it's the types of debt. It's you get fixed rate debt. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big advocate of 30-year fixed rate debt. Mm-hmm. So the beautiful thing about that is that, 9 years ago, I was able to borrow over $100,000 at low 4% interest rate. And so that payment has never changed since I bought the property. Mm-hmm. So the rent's gone up. The rent has gone up significantly, probably 70%, maybe even doubled on some of these properties, but the mortgage payment has stayed the same. So 30-year fixed rate debt is just a phenomenal loan product to get into, keeps your costs down, keeps the payment down. every month. So it does improve your cash flow. So just through the realtor, I got introduced to a mortgage lender and was able to get pre-qualified. So I knew I had some buying power. So really that's like one of the first steps that I'd recommend anyone who's looking to buy their first rental property, especially if you have a W-2, if you're an employee at a company, start talking to lenders. Because that way you'll know if you can get a loan, and if you can, how much can you actually borrow. So from there, you can start looking at different opportunities and ultimately know what you can afford to buy. So you want to get that pre-approval letter so that when you do start talking to agents, brokers, when you start getting in the game, then you can actually show that you're able to buy these properties. So, that's definitely one of the first steps is like talking to brokers, talking to agents. But you also need to know what you're doing. You need to learn the language of real estate. You need to learn how to analyze a rental property. You need to know how to find deals, right? So, funny thing, I know we were talking earlier, I was working with the real estate agent to start looking at properties.
Yeah.
And so she was bringing me deals, and she said, "Hey, check out this property. It's an amazing deal. You should offer on it." So that was the first offer that I sent on a piece of real estate. It was a duplex in North County, San Diego. I think it was around like $400,000, a little bit over that. So I was looking in San Diego. That's where we lived at the time, and where we still live. And so I was looking in the backyard. That's what we always recommend. So looking in the backyard, and was told it was a great deal. So I said, "Hey, let's put in an offer." So she wrote the offer. I signed it. We submitted it. While we're waiting to hear back, I actually took a closer look at the deal, and I ran the numbers. Just kind of looked up, how do I analyze a rental property? And so ran the numbers, and I realized that at the price that I offered, I would have been losing money, almost $1,000 a month. So I called the agent, and I was like, "Hey, you told me this was a great deal, but when I'm running the numbers, I'm actually losing money every month." And so she said, "Oh, well, it's a great area. It'll go up in value over time, and it's a great buy, compared to the pricing in the area." So obviously, looking back 9 years later, if I bought that property, I would have been pretty well off. I would have made hundreds of thousands of dollars on that property. But for me at that time, when I was really just pinching every dollar and saving, like I couldn't afford to buy a property where I'm losing money every month.
Yeah, didn't make financial sense.
Yeah. So part of my criteria at the time was I need to buy a rental property that was going to cash flow, that was going to produce more income than expenses. So at the end of every month, I would have more money than I had at the beginning of the month. Like that was the point. So I wanted cash flow. So after looking at a lot of properties in San Diego from this agent, I realized that I can't create cash flow immediately. And, the strategy in San Diego at the time and even today is like, hey, you buy something and you're probably going to be losing money for the first year, 2 years. And eventually the rents are going to go up through renovations, through adding ADUs and building units on a property, just forcing value. But at that time, and we're doing that right now, but at the time I couldn't afford to lose $1,000 a month, right? So I said, hey, it's not going to work here, but I'm going to look in other markets, right? Beautiful thing about real estate in the day that we live in the year that we live in, is that we have the whole country available to us on our laptops. We have the whole market available to us. So I started looking in other states, other markets where I could buy more properties, right? The houses weren't $400,000. They were $100,000, $200,000. And the numbers made sense, and I could find cash flow pretty easily. So that led me to look out of state and, just kind of went on that path and ultimately bought my first rental property in Tennessee.
There we go. So as we were talking earlier too, I loved how you started in your backyard. You started in San Diego. You started to develop your criteria. I need something that cash flows day one. Doesn't make financial sense for me to invest here in San Diego at this time, or with this agent that's telling me, these are good deals when they're really not. And also you learned a very important lesson that a lot of agents don't know what they're talking about as well. You learned that, hey, I got to analyze every single property for myself, and take what an agent says with a grain of salt. So I'm sure that lesson has helped you moving forward, and then also on these other deals. How'd you go about, two questions. How'd you decide on a single family residence as your first rental property? Because I think a lot of people get stuck on just, I want to invest in real estate, and they're thinking land, commercial, apartment buildings. And also people think, hey, I got to invest in an apartment building. How'd you land on single family houses first?
Yeah, I was open to duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, but single families were the most relatable. I'd done a little bit of property management of single family houses, so I was a little bit more familiar with the components of a single family. I really liked how you could pass off utilities to the tenant completely. With multifamily, sometimes it gets a little trickier if there isn't a meter on every unit for each utility. It was just one unit, one lease. It was much more relatable. Being my first real estate investment on my own, it was something that I felt like it was just more comfortable. And I also just like the fact that if I did want to sell, there's going to be a bigger buyer pool. There's owner occupants who are looking to buy single family houses. And I would expect that to also cause appreciation of the property.
Yeah.
Because if you're buying an apartment building or even a duplex, triplex in a heavily multifamily area, those are generally less desirable areas, right? More people want to live in a single family house than in an apartment. So I just knew from that fundamental concept, single families are just more desirable. It's more of the American dream. And it's just something that I would expect more appreciation to occur on. And so the other thing was when I started looking in Tennessee, most of the properties in these areas were single family houses as well. So kind of the inventory in the markets I was looking at were more single family focused anyways. So for a number of reasons, I gravitated towards that. And also, as it was a kind of a big mountain to climb to save for the down payment, with single family properties, you get some of the best financing as well.
Yeah.
So you can put 20% down on an investment property versus 25 is the minimum typically, sometimes even 30% for a multifamily property. So I had to save less, I had to put less down, and I could actually borrow more from the bank and have usually more attractive interest rates on single family properties. So that was another huge factor now that I think about it, was just less down and just the ease of getting into that investment. Just made it kind of a no-brainer for me. Just, hey, let's start with single family. We like to say crawl, walk, run. Eventually I can get into a bigger building. Eventually I'll buy an apartment complex. But let's just start with the single family house. It's a first investment. Let's just start experiencing what it's like to be a landlord. Let's just get those first rent payments coming in and just start managing my business that way. And then, eventually we'll scale up. And, that's what happened.
Yeah, and it proved to be true, right? And yeah, focusing on single family houses, I mean, for a lot of America, that anyone that grew up in a house, they're familiar with that type of product. So I think that's a great point, plus all the other benefits of appreciation. And then how'd you go about figuring out these locations? And I think, I'm not trying to lead you, but I think you want something that was going to cash flow from day one and something that in a market that was going to appreciate as well. So how'd you go about finding those markets and then landing on Tennessee?
Yeah, so I was talking to a lot of people, right? Like when I'm running my routes at Pepsi, I was calling everyone I knew who was like successful, who I felt like was further along, who was interested in investing. So along the way, I had met some people who were buying rental properties and who were buying not just one or two, like multiple. And they had recommended, hey, like here's some markets we're interested in or that we're buying in that you should take a look at. One of those was Memphis, Tennessee. I was also looking in multiple markets in Florida. There was like Jacksonville and Tampa as well, and also Chicago. So there was like a few different markets that came up when I was just like talking to people who were buying out of state, who were buying these rental properties and just kind of like having them managed by other people. And so I was just kind of fascinated by that. And so I ended up focusing in on Memphis just because I felt like it had a lot of the fundamentals that I felt comfortable with. Like Florida, there's hurricanes, there's humidity, there's a lot of rain. I just wasn't very comfortable with it. There's just a lot of potential like additional risk involved. Sure, you can get flood insurance, but who wants to deal with the headache of filing an insurance claim on a house that gets blown away by a hurricane? Not to say that Florida is a fantastic market to buy in and invest in, and I've done flips and whatnot out there. It's a great market, but for me at that time, I was like, hey, how do I mitigate risk? And then Chicago was somewhere that I just felt like the weather was rough, very rough winters, ice cold, potential plumbing bursts could happen, things like that. You have to winterize your property if it's vacant. So I was like, hey, like Memphis just seems like a good place. Sure, it does have some weather, but it just seemed like from a natural catastrophe perspective, it was like lower on the radar from a risk perspective. It just seemed like a wholesome kind of place, to live and to, own rental property. And so kind of just ended up going with that and ended up buying a handful of properties there, after that first one, but, ended up working out. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. So I like how, maybe someone grew up in Chicago, right, and has familiarity with, weatherizing a property, right? Mm-hmm. Doing what they need to do to make sure it can last the seasons. And so coming from San Diego, you picked Tennessee, familiar with that type of weather to some degree, And so now you focused on Tennessee. You said, hey, I'm going to pursue this market. You're now focused. How'd you go about finding this particular property in Memphis, Tennessee, the one Tate Drive that we're going to dive into, that cash flow that's been appreciating? Who'd you leverage? How'd you go about finding this property? And maybe talk about if you had to look at other properties as well to find this one, because it's not always the first deal that comes across your plate is the best one. As you already said, you got deals across your plate in San Diego that didn't work out. Now focusing on Tennessee, how'd you find this particular property?
Yeah, great question. So I was, again, talking to, there's this one individual, and his name was Mike, who was my mom's friend from, years back, who they had worked together, and he was one of the guys who was buying properties out of state, and he was building a portfolio. And so he introduced me to a team, or actually multiple teams, but I ended up connecting with this real estate agent in Memphis, mm-hmm. and they were the co-owner of a brokerage who also had a management company, who also had an investment company. So they kind of had everything in-house and totally integrated with each other. And so their model, they do brokerage, traditional retail brokerage, but they also flip houses to investors who would buy and hold these properties, and they would manage them. So ultimately connected with this agent. His name was also Ryan, so we hit it off, obviously, naturally.
Nice rapport.
Yeah, great rapport. And, so we started talking, and I felt good about what they had going. So I was just kind of on their list, and as a buyer who was pre-approved, ready to go. Yeah. And so they would send properties to their list, of investors, and if you're interested, you kind of just have to raise your hand and say, hey, I want to move forward with this. And so I went through about two of those scenarios where I wanted to buy the property and I wanted to move forward, but I was just a little bit late. We love to say good deals go quick, mm-hmm. and that's absolutely true in real estate. So I missed out on the first two, but the third one I did get. I was ready to go. I realized, hey, I got to jump on this. So I was just constantly watching my emails and just waiting for the next deal to hit. And so when it did, I decided to, ran the numbers real quick. I said, hey, this works. Let's do it. And I was quick enough to get, that property, wrote an offer, got it under contract, and then open escrow, and that was Tate Drive.
There we go. All right. So looking at 3 different properties in that particular market. Once you narrowed it down, you worked with the real estate agent to be able to find you this deal. And we love working with real estate agents, have been, for the last 10 years. What was that? So you were already pre-approved, right? One of the most important things, you knew you could afford this property, which then allowed you to run a financial analysis on this property to see that it was going to cash flow.
Yep.
You liked the market. Now, what was that closing process like, right? You've done the numbers, right? You know it's going to cash flow. This is one of your first closings, or maybe your first closing?
Yeah, it was the first property that I ever bought on my own. So it was me on the contract, So me on the pre-approval letter. Yeah, no co-signers or anything. Just I had enough cash to buy it. So yeah, the deal came to me. It was $155,000, and I knew 20%. That was about $31,000. So I knew, hey, like this is kind of on the upper end of what I was seeing in the market. Like there was the other properties, they were around 100,000, even 70,000, 80,000. So this was definitely on the higher end, and of course the rent was a little higher, but it was in more of like an A class neighborhood versus some of the other ones were like a B and C, where maybe you have higher cash flow, but maybe less potential for appreciation. So yeah, got that third deal under contract, opened escrow. One of the things that was really important to me, like I mentioned, was having cash flow immediately, right? Yeah. Cash flow day one are the best deals. And, I always strive to have a tenant in there at closing or shortly thereafter. So one of the terms I negotiated in the contract was making the contract contingent on having a tenant lease in place prior to closing, so that we had someone move in before I closed. So I knew that immediately I was producing a positive return. Like literally the second I closed, there was money coming into my name. So the seller agreed to it. They're a little bit more obviously flexible because they own the property. They did some repairs to the property, and they sold it to me, and they're making a profit. So there was a little bit more flexibility. And so they did agree to that, which was really nice, and helped me feel good about the deal, and helped me feel like it would immediately cash flow, which is something that was important to me. I didn't want to lose any money immediately.
I mean, that's a smart move, and pro tip for anyone that can swing it, putting that into the contract. I mean, that's huge, and I think it goes back to your money principles, and your goal is not to lose money, right? Warren Buffett says that too. Yeah. Rule number 1, don't lose money. So I think that's pretty savvy of you. To be able to do that and negotiate those terms. And I think for anyone at this particular point watching, hasn't bought their first rental property, what was that transaction and closing experience like? Did you have hesitancy? Were you scared? Were you excited? Because this is your first rental property, right? Your name's on the contract. You've done all this education. You've saved your money. This is your life savings. You're putting in this property. You've been grinding a year, right? 4:30 a.m., leaving in the dark, coming home when it's dark. Yeah, it's a lot of pressure to make sure it goes right, and you don't want to mess this deal up. So what was like the emotional experience at this time?
Yeah, I was very excited. I was a little bit nervous. To me, it was like my ticket out. My ticket out of the 9-to-5 grind, the 6-to-6 grind. The corporate world. It was me taking a stance and saying, hey, I'm going to start a business and I'm going to become a real estate investor. And it was when it became real. And so, and I knew it was like, hey, look, like most people around me aren't doing this. Most people around me aren't buying rental properties over 1,000 miles away across the country that they have never seen before. So I felt like I was doing something very different and unconventional. And that really excited me. I've always liked to be a little bit more bold and out there and like try to do things that other people aren't. And so that just, it felt really good, but also, kind of nerve wracking. So, through that process, in the purchase agreement, I had contingencies, as most people do, had an appraisal contingency. So needed to make sure the property appraised at the value that an appraiser would give it. Or more, compared to the purchase price, and also had an inspection contingency just to make sure that the property was in good condition, that there wasn't any like serious issues with the roof or the mechanicals, that everything was in good condition, and also financing contingency. So to make sure that just in case if something happened with my financing, that I wasn't locked in and I wasn't going to have to be forced to buy the deal with money I didn't have. So I had some protections in place. And of course, from the day you open escrow on a contract to buy a property, there's things that still need to happen before you're ultimately, going to buy the property. So, I felt committed from the first day. I knew I wanted to do it. I just knew I had to be careful and I had to cross my T's, dot my I's. Ran the numbers probably 100 times before closing, just to make sure my math was right. And then also, of course, did a third party inspection. Just hired someone that I found to inspect the property. Do the physical inspection, and then use that inspection to negotiate, some different things just to make it a little bit more attractive. And then the property did appraise for a little bit even higher than what I had it under contract for. So I had it under contract for $155,000. I think the appraisal came in at like 157, 158. So, it felt like it was a win, getting
equity.
Getting some equity immediately. So, making, $2,000 to $3,000 on that initial investment was still a win.
That's great.
Immediately. So
that's a month of work.
Yeah. That was a big deal. So the appraisal checked out, the inspection ultimately checked out, got a home warranty, got a termite clearance for the lender, and then just going through that process, working with the lender was just fortunately all worked out. I wasn't even sure if I was going to get the loan at the end of the day. It was just kind of surreal, but just went through the process, just was open, honest, and ultimately was able to close and had a tenant in place, cash flowing from day one.
There we go.
Yeah.
Good job. And so you close on the first deal. This property is 1,000 miles away. And so you had to make a decision as well. How the heck am I going to manage this property, right? This is your first rental property. You're working with this agent. They have in-house property management. So you decide, hey, I'm not going to self-manage this thing 1,000 miles away. I'm going to have this professional management company manage it. And would you recommend that for someone on their first rental property if the numbers make sense? If a property is 1,000 miles away, or would you recommend self-managing it?
Yeah, if you're buying your first rental property, don't manage it yourself, especially if it's long distance, right? If it's in your backyard, I would say it's doable. Property management can be very difficult. You see a lot of things as a property manager. It's not for the faint of heart. And especially, if it's a long distance investment, hire a property manager, because you're not going to want to have to take the maintenance calls if you don't have any maintenance contacts, you don't know any contractors in that city. You don't want to have to deal with the showings and the leasing. Sometimes rental properties get leased up with your first showing. I've had that happen many times, but sometimes it'll take a while. And what are you going to do if you don't have boots on the ground yet? So fortunately, the agent I was working with also had a property management company under the same umbrella, so decided to give them a shot. I did a pretty hefty interview with them beforehand, read their property management agreement line by line, highlighted every time there was a fee involved, any processes, procedures. I would talk to them about it. Even negotiated a couple things here and there. They would charge a late fee to the tenant and they would keep the late fee. I said, hey, well, let's split that 50-50. So a couple things like that. Everything's negotiable in real estate. So even early on, I was trying to figure out ways to make the return better, but also just make it a win-win with everyone I was working with. So yeah, absolutely. If you're a new real estate investor, beginning real estate investor, I would definitely highly recommend get a professional property manager to manage your property. You can learn from them, understand how they run their business, and then, eventually, if you so choose to, you can take that over. But long distance, fortunately was able to work with this management company. They've done a phenomenal job, and they manage, the other properties I own in the city too. So they've been great. I can't say that about every other property management company I've worked with, but there are some really good ones out there.
They're actually managing your property for you. It's cash flowing from day one. Let's talk about these numbers now. And I think what's important is to talk about these numbers when you acquire this deal so that everyone can see this humble first rental property. And then let's talk about where it's at today. Let's talk about the appreciation, where the cash flow is out today. Because I was very excited to do this video today just to share with our audience, to share with our colleagues or students, because there's so many people that have known for the last 9 years they need to buy an investment property and they haven't yet. And I think what we're about to show them today, they see this today, they will want to take action. They will know that they've been missing out. They will know that there's a huge opportunity cost if they're not investing into real estate. So the purpose of showing these numbers is to motivate anyone watching this to start taking action, start changing your life like you changed your life 9 years ago, and to give a real life example of what one property can do. And as we're going through this, think about what 10 properties can do, 20 properties, 30 properties can do. As you like to say, right, real estate isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a get-rich-for-sure plan. And so this property is going to show that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into the numbers. So I was fortunate to go and actually see the property while I was in escrow. So snapped a photo. So I have this nice photo, me in front of the property, right before I closed on it. So it's very nostalgic. I'm definitely happy and chipper in it, and standing in front of my first rental. So really just love just kind of looking back on what were the numbers going into it, right? So I mentioned it was $155,000 purchase price, and the down payment was 20%, right? One of the advantages of single family investing is you can put 20% down on an investment property. So that's $31,000. And I'm borrowing $124,000, right? So that's 80% loan to value based on the purchase price of $155,000. So obviously multiply that purchase price by 80%. That's the loan amount. So obviously the bank's not just going to give me that amount and expect no return. So I'm having to pay monthly to repay that debt over 30 years. So the interest rate on that I think was around 4.3%, if I'm not mistaken. It was somewhere around there. So going into it, the rent I was projecting was $1,300. So, I confirmed it with the property manager, confirmed it with the agent. I looked on my own, looked at Zillow, looked at other houses for rent in the area. So I thought that was pretty agreeable. And so fortunately, we were able to get a lease signed for $1,300 a month before closing. So annually, that's $15,600 of rent in the first year, right? This is 2015. So the principal and interest payment, so when you're making your mortgage payments, it consists of principal and interest. Principal is what you're paying back, paying down your principal balance of the loan, and then the interest payment is the lender's profit. So in my case, it was $637 a month, and obviously you're paying property taxes as well. So obviously the government takes their piece, so that was $60 a month or $720 a year. There's insurance, right? We want to have property insurance, so landlord insurance to protect yourself from, hazards, fires, break-ins, different things like that. So that was about just under $1,600 a year or $133 a month. And then the property manager, so they take 8% of gross rents collected. So most property management companies will take a percentage of the rents that they collect. Sometimes there's leasing fees involved. In this case, it was 8% of the gross rent or $104 a month. So once I collected the rent and paid all the expenses, we have what we call cash flow, right? So this is what I knew would be a good deal and would be an adequate return for me going into this deal. There was $366 of total cash flow at the end of the month. Annually, that's over $4,000, about $4,392 to be exact. And once we have this cash flow, right, this is passive income, right? Everyone talks about passive income in real estate. This is that passive income. So, we're collecting the rent, someone else is managing it, paying the bills, and now I have this net income of over $300 a month. So when you annualize that and compare it to the down payment, this is where we get our cash-on-cash return. So this was the most important number, right, the most important return on investment number that I was looking at. And I still look at when I'm buying deals. It's how much money am I investing into this property to buy it, and then what's my yield at the end of the year, and how do you compare those two together? So you basically divide your annual cash flow by your total investment in the deal. So in this case, it produced a 14% cash-on-cash return, a little bit over 14%. So that I was very happy with. Even if I budgeted a little bit more for, more maintenance, more capital expenses, things like that, there's still plenty of cash flow. And, when you compare it to the stock market, or if you're buying bonds, right, treasury bills, where you're earning in the low single digits, or, stock market, maybe even 10% per year, just on the cash flow alone, I was at least meeting the stock market or even beating the stock market.
Yeah.
So I knew that even if this property goes down in value, that I could still rent it out and I could still produce a return that I was happy with. And if it stayed like that forever, I would be happy with it. So my mindset was like, I just want to buy and hold forever. So I wasn't planning on selling it. I was just going to park the money and let it cash flow. And, over $300 a month was meaningful, like that still is meaningful. So I was very excited, very happy with it. And fortunately, that tenant stayed for 4 years. So we didn't have any turnover. We didn't have any vacancy. And, for 4 whole years. So it was a great tenant that ended up leasing from us.
That's awesome. And so that's much better than the San Diego deals you were looking at the time where that cash flow was negative 1,000. So it made sense. You analyzed it. So just on the cash flow alone, over 14% cash on cash return. But I think what will be cool to go into is the other types of returns we're getting on this property, because that's sometimes where only a beginner is looking at that return. There's even more to dive into. And around this time, right, I started wholesaling and flipping houses before I bought rental properties. Right, one thing you taught me, Alex, you have someone own your rental property, your net worth is increasing every single month, right? That debt is going down. And so I think the next thing we can dive into is that debt reduction and net worth increase that's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just always love the concept of making money while you sleep, right? I don't have to get out of bed. I don't have to wake up at 4:30 a.m. and go work, grind for someone else. If I just buy a rental property, even if it breaks even and just pays for itself, I know that someone else is paying off that loan every single month. And it's really helpful to look at a mortgage calculator, look at your amortization schedule to see how much of every payment is actually building your equity and paying down that loan. Because over time, that loan will get paid off. In the beginning of the loan, it's mostly interest. So it takes, 3 to 5 years to really see a meaningful decrease in that loan balance. But even just that first year, we can kind of just take a look. It was basically getting paid off with every single payment. So I think at least over $100 a month additional was just getting paid down in principal. So it's almost just like this hidden return, this hidden wealth building principle that just happens from when you're paying down that mortgage, and it's even better when someone else is paying off your mortgage. So I'm borrowing $120,000 and someone else is paying it off for me. So eventually that equity will be mine. That $120,000 will just be my net worth if someone else just pays it off and I just hold it for 30 years. And if you do the math, that still is a phenomenal return. If I never sold and I just pay it off over 30 years, that's still a mind-blowing return.
Yeah. So
that's pretty exciting. And so when you look at the numbers, I had a $124,000 mortgage balance, and over the years I've owned it, I would say the average of the pay down every year was, probably a couple $1,000s, right? Probably $2,200 a year in principal pay down, which is ultimately, my net worth is increasing. So it's beyond the cash flow, right? It's illiquid, so it's trapped in the property. For those of you who aren't sure what equity really is, I know that took a long time for me to understand what building equity is all about. But it's essentially the difference between the market value of the property and the loan balance. So when you own a property, if you own it 100% outright, you're the only owner of the property, and you have $100,000 loan, and the property's worth $200,000, then you have $100,000 of equity in that property. So as that loan balance decreases, your equity increases. And so that's the power of the debt reduction. So when someone's paying off that mortgage every month, then you're just getting richer in your sleep, which is nice.
And so, right, if we look at that increased equity average, $2,200 against a $31,000 down payment, 7.2% cash on cash return, roughly. So we're going to add these up as we keep on going.
Yeah. So it's not only the cash flow, it's the debt reduction. So I mean, this whole, this kind of exercise is highlighting the different dimensions of return that a rental property does produce. So it's not just the cash flow. It's not just the debt reduction. There's other things as well. So there are tax benefits, right? So, one of the things that's great about investment property is that all that interest that we pay every single month to the lender, that's tax deductible. So that means you can use that payment to offset any income you're producing. So at the end of the year, the lender will send you a 1098 statement, which shows you how much interest you actually did pay. And then you can use that to offset income that you earned during that year from that property. So, the mortgage interest deduction is great. It's one of the reasons why you probably want to have a mortgage on a rental property is because you can use that as a nice deduction. You also get depreciation in real estate, which is one of the magical things about owning property that is just, it's kind of a difficult concept to really understand, but it really is how some of the most high income earning people will pay zero or very low amount in taxes every year. It's because they own real estate and they depreciate that real estate. So what is depreciation? Depreciation is ultimately a paper loss that you can take as a real estate investor because the property in the eyes of the IRS is losing value. It's depreciating. It's becoming obsolete over the years. So land itself doesn't become obsolete, but think about the components of a building, the foundation, the roof, the siding, the plumbing, the electrical, the floors, the counters. Everything will age over time. It is just the reality, right? You're probably gonna have to remodel your properties every 10 years or so because things just age. So when you own these things, you can actually take losses against the value of that. And so even though the property is going up in value most of the time, you can actually take paper losses just from the value of it. So it's really an amazing concept. And, there's a few ways to actually depreciate a property. So typically you take the value of the property, and if you use what they call straight line depreciation, which just means that every 27 and a half years is the number that the IRS uses. It says that the property completely depreciates and goes from the full value to zero over 27 and a half years. So if you take the building value and you divide it by 27 and a half, you can kind of roughly get to what your tax deduction will be from depreciation on a property. But there's a beautiful thing called accelerated depreciation, which you can actually accelerate that timeline to 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, because you can do what's called a cost segregation study, and you'll actually break down all those components and accelerate the life, because the IRS will say that a carpet actually depreciates a lot faster than a roof. And same with, a counter versus, an HVAC system. So they'll actually just break down the components and you can accelerate that depreciation, and you can get massive write-offs the first year you buy a property. So one of the reasons why a lot of high income earners will buy real estate is really for the tax benefits. I mean, I would never buy a property just for the tax benefits. It still needs to make sense on its own. But there can be a massive ROI from buying a property just because you can reduce your taxable income at the end of the year. And using depreciation, using cost segregation, it can be, I've taken hundreds of thousands of dollars of depreciation losses, which saved me, tens of thousands of dollars or even more in taxes just from buying a property.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So it's massive. And really everything, the cool thing about being a landlord and a real estate investor is that you can start a business that buys real estate and manages real estate. So not only do you get deductions and tax benefits from owning real estate, but you can become a business owner that happens to invest in real estate at the same time. So you can now get anything related to investing in real estate, you can now deduct as a business expense as well. If you go take a flight and you go check out a neighborhood that you're potentially going to invest in, that can be a tax write-off. You go travel to you go to Hawaii, you want to check out some condos to potentially invest in, that can be a write-off. So real estate can be an amazing way to get into business for yourself, to start an LLC, to start an S Corp, a corporation, and now you can develop write-offs as you're now a business owner who's investing in real estate and managing assets that you just so happen to own. So there's a lot of write-offs. I mean, real estate is the most tax-favored asset class that exists, in the eyes of the IRS. So it's a great place to be if you're looking for tax benefits. So, through all of that just creates another element of return in this rental property.
Yeah, another dimension, like you were saying. And so we just look at depreciate. I mean, there's all those tax benefits. We just look at depreciation alone. You want to talk about those tax savings, hypothetically, if you're in a 39.6% tax bracket?
Yeah. So, one example, I bought a property in 2020, and went through with the cost segregation, did the accelerated depreciation. So the way the math worked out, it was an $850,000 property. I figured about 65% of that value was the building value, and then I think it was about a third of that was the tax savings. So it was like I was able to offset income, $200 or close to $300,000, and applying that to a 40% tax bracket, like that's over 6-figure tax savings.
Yeah.
So I didn't do that on this particular property, right? I wasn't a very high income earner at that time, so I was doing straight line depreciation on this particular property, Tate Drive. But just like later in my career, I actually learned more about cost segregation, learned about accelerated depreciation, was able to take much bigger losses as a result, much bigger tax savings as a result. So I forget the exact math, but ultimately, you can just create some massive losses, which can save, tremendous amount on taxes. And so, saying that I've heard a lot is it's not what you make, it's what you keep. So, when you get into business, you're allowed to, keep more of the money that you make, which is an amazing thing.
And I pulled some rough numbers for the depreciation on this property using straight line, but roughly about $1,785 in tax savings on average. And compared against your down payment that you put in, 5.75% cash on cash return. So the returns keep on coming when we just look at one facet of tax benefits, just depreciation alone. And then one of your favorite things, one of my favorite things is appreciation. And let's talk about appreciation on this particular property, because your goal was to have a rental property that not only cash flowed, but appreciated. And that's exactly what happened.
Absolutely. Just to kind of like help people understand what that is, like, when you look at a loss of $4,500, in this case, $4,509, that's saying that my income has now been reduced by that amount. So that is $4,500 less that I have to pay taxes on. So at that, almost 40% tax bracket, every dollar I can reduce in my taxable income is 40 cents that I don't have to pay in taxes. So I just it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around that, because every dollar you are saying you're not making is you're saving 40 cents on that. So even though the property went up in value, which we're about to talk about, just from that tax savings, the cash flow I was making, right? I was producing over 4,000, somewhere around 4,000 a year in cash flow. I can now offset that by the depreciation, so I'm not paying taxes on that cash flow, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cancels out.
Yeah, it certainly does. So, let's talk about appreciation. Property appreciation. I didn't go into this deal thinking that there'd be appreciation. I had hoped for it.
Yeah.
But I was okay if that never happened.
Yeah.
I'd expected it. It'd be nice, but never really bought based on appreciation.
You weren't banking on it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't like, hey, I'm buying the San Diego property that's losing money every month, and my only saving grace is for the value to go up significantly and then for me to sell or refinance. So I knew that I could keep this property forever and I'd be okay with it. So fortunately enough, after, a year, 2 years, 3 years went by, and I was just doing my thing, collecting the rents, didn't have any vacancy, I started to notice that, hey, like the value seems to be going up, at least, like on Zillow, the Zestimates. I wasn't like watching the comps in the neighborhood, every year or anything, but, I'd pop in there and I would see, the Zestimate, and then I'd see some homes selling in the area. And I noticed like, hey, the value does seem to be going up, which is awesome. And, at a certain point, I realized that, year 3, the property was worth, almost $200,000. So that meant to me that, hey, my investment of $31,000 has more than doubled already in 3 years. So to me, I was surprised, because when you do the math on that, that's like over 33% return every single year on appreciation.
Yeah.
So I didn't know anyone else making those kind of returns. Even in, the stock market, you hear about these, these funds, these mutual funds, and, they're trying to just beat the market. And if they do that, like they're doing really well. But here I am buying this humble single family property in Tennessee, little old me, and I'm making, 30% returns on appreciation, 14% on cash flow, another 5% on, tax savings. So like, wow, you do the math, like that's serious returns. So kind of just fast forward a little bit, the property kept, increasing in value. So I was like, okay, well, I did buy in a decent area, and a lot of the fundamentals seemed to be clicking. So it looked like, the total appreciation was, well over the, average. They say houses go up every, 3% every year, 3 to 5% a year maybe, but it seemed like it was going up a lot more than that in my case. So I think what's really important for people to understand is that, let's say I bought the property cash, right? If it goes up 5% a year, then that's a 5% return on the appreciation. But if I put 20% down and the property goes up 5%, then I've just 5x'd my return by using leverage. So now it's like a 25% return on that initial investment. So the returns can magnify when you're using leverage, when you're buying with good debt. So so that's what I was experiencing too. So eventually, fast forward to today, that property is worth, I think it's $315,000.
Yeah.
So the value is more than doubled. So if you look at that, the annual appreciation has been, significant, over 40% return, I would say, every single year. And, so essentially my down payment went from, $31,000 of cash that I put in the deal to now worth over, $215,000 of equity. So, over 9 years, that's like 5-6 times the investment. So, I mean, that's pretty mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
So who wouldn't want those returns?
No, everyone. And right, everyone wants that. I want that. We get that when we invest in rental properties, and that's while someone's paying down the debt for you while your net worth is increasing. Now let's hit the property appreciation on the specific property.
Let's do it. So, going into this deal, when I'm running my numbers, I'm not banking on appreciation. I'm not expecting any appreciation. I would love for that to happen, right? But I'm not making my investment, only relying on the value going up, right? That's more speculating. Like I can't control that, but I can control the cash flow. I can control the purchase price. I can control the expenses to some degree. And so I was happy with the cash flow, but fortunately enough, I started to notice, after owning the property for, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, the things pumping out cash flow. I'm popping on Zillow and seeing that the value is going up. The Zestimate's going up.
It's gotta feel good.
It felt great. Just made me feel like, okay, well, I bought in a good area. It's kind of creeping up there, and I don't usually rely on Zestimates, but I start to take a look at some of the comps, and I see, hey, there's some property selling, for more than what I paid for mine. So it's a good sign. And, I think it was in year 3 where the property, was worth around, 190, 195,000, almost 200,000. And it was then I realized, hey, my equity that I put in, my $31,000 from my life savings that went into this thing, has now doubled, in 3 years, which is a phenomenal return by any standard.
Yeah.
I think anyone would be happy with doubling their money in 3 years. And obviously not even including the cash flow or tax benefits we talked about or debt pay down. But I realized, like, wow, I earned, over 30%, 35% return on my capital from solely the appreciation. And of course it's, I haven't sold it yet. I still own this property. But I knew that, like, think about with stocks, right? Like, people have their whole retirement portfolio on the paper, gains and kind of just the illusion of wealth where their stocks are worth more, but it's not really your money until you sell it. So it's kind of the same concept, but I knew that my equity in the property has gone up based on the market value. So it was pretty awesome because I know, like, I don't know a lot of other people making, 30, 40% returns on anything.
Mm-mm.
And, little old me buying this, single family property in Tennessee is doing really well with this one property.
Mm-hmm.
And just got me really fired up just to double, triple, quadruple down on real estate.
That's phenomenal. I mean, I think taking it back to the principle, you weren't banking on appreciation. That's so important. We never like speculating in anything that we do, whether it's buying rental properties, flipping, wholesaling. And that allows you to have really sound principles going into it that even if it didn't appreciate, you're still making money. And then looking at here, right, we average over across 9 years about 8% average of total appreciation, which is wild. I think it's normally 3-4% a year, but that's phenomenal appreciation. And so on average, this property's appreciated about $12,400 a year looking back on it, which is nuts.
Yeah, it's wild compared to the down payment. So, I mean, it really highlights the impact that leverage can have on a real estate deal. So if I bought this property cash and it went up 8% a year, then my return's like 8% on appreciation because I have zero leverage on the deal.
Mm-hmm.
But since I put only 20% down, right, I only put in 20 cents on the dollar to buy this house.
Mm-hmm.
And when that goes up 8%, I'm 5xing that return. So that's, over 30%, 40% return on my capital just from that appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's just a really powerful concept that took me like a while to really grasp the power of leverage and how you can amplify your returns significantly, life-changing returns just from using debt, using smart debt, mm-hmm. and using that to buy profitable real estate deals that cash flow, that produce rental income.
Mm-hmm.
So just the only way that this 30-40% return on appreciation happens is because I'm using leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And so just really grateful that it worked out like that. So but it's worth mentioning, this equity, it's sitting there, and ultimately the best way to get the most out of that equity is to either refinance it or 1031 exchange that property. You have to sell it, otherwise it's just sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels good, it definitely feels good, but the real returns, the tangible returns, is really that cash flow and the tax benefits.
Mm-hmm. But still, there, if you decide to sell today, right? If you decide to liquidate that property, and once we add all that up, the total cash-on-cash return, just from using some averages across the last 9 years, but just that year one, I think it's important to talk to that annual return now on a $31,000 down payment. Because I think most people, even me when I was getting started, I just looked at what was my cash-on-cash return versus my down payment and the cash flow, and that was it. It wasn't until getting started in these types of properties you start to see the other benefits that come in, and you're going to see that return is much higher than just the 14% cash-on-cash return. So you want to touch on total return year one, and then we can go into year 9 where it's at today, which I think everyone's going to be pretty ecstatic about, and really show the power of just what happens when you get in real estate and the growth over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, real estate has multiple elements of return. This is a great kind of just summary of what happened with this one rental property. The cash flow at the end of the year, there's a net profit, which is liquid, distributable, spendable cash flow, which, I could do whatever I want with, essentially. That was over $4,000, $4,392, about 14% ROI based on my down payment. There was the debt reduction, which we cap around $2,200 a year, about a little over 7% ROI. There's the tax savings, which we calculated about $1,785, 5.75% based on the down payment again. And that appreciation really just really amplifies those returns. So on average, about $12,400 a year, which is 40% of that down payment, which is massive. Mm-hmm. So all that together, really the total return, and this is still year one, right? This is in year one of owning the property, was almost $21,000. Mm-hmm. And right, I put in $31,000, and so that total return is 67% of my down payment. So And we still see deals like this today, where you can buy a property, and when you look at the total return on a deal, you can see that you're making, multiple, double-digit returns on a single investment, right? When you're buying it, right? This is what we teach our students, right? This is what we teach people in our community, of not just looking at one element of a real estate deal, not just looking at your cash-on-cash return. It's let's look at the total return on investment, because it's easy to skip on deals and pass on deals, because you're too caught up in the negotiation. Maybe the seller's not giving you that extra $1,000 credit, to buy the deal. But when you look at the big picture, I like to say time heals all wounds in real estate, especially with buy and hold deals. Like, even if you overpay a little bit for the property, right? If I paid $165,000 for this property, right? If the seller, stiff-armed me at the last minute and said, hey, you got to pay me another $10,000, and I lost on this deal, then I would have missed out on a lot, right? This massive wealth enhancer for myself. Like, I would have missed out if I was just, stressing over, a few $1,000s here and there. So, so I love seeing this, because it gives the big picture of what can happen when you buy a rental property, and the wealth building factors that can occur for really anybody who replicates this model, which is why we're so passionate about sharing this message and sharing this deal.
And this just goes to show, right, in year one, what's possible in a real estate deal, right? A lot of these things can be overlooked, a lot of these returns. And, right, it's easier to connect the dots looking backwards, as it always is on everything. But we wanted to show this year one, what it could do, just for anyone that has been scared and hesitant to investing in that first rental property, and to be aware of the other types of savings, be aware of the other types of ROI that you can get on a rental property. And then specifically, let's dive now into where it's at today, and we can focus on the cash flow. And I want to ask you, before we go into this slide, do you regret buying this property at all?
The only regret is that I didn't buy 100 of them.
There we go. Awesome. So, dive into the cash flow where it's at today. We'll show a comparison of where it was the first year, but where it's at today is just amazing. I think once you start to look at this one property, right? You own dozens and dozens. We own a couple hundred rental units together. You start to picture and imagine, what happens if I buy one of these a quarter or one of these a year? It's sometimes it's hard to change your life in 1 year, but look at what can happen in 9 years, 10 years. You can drastically change your life, your family's life, by making smart decisions and investing in real estate, compound your money, and beat the common stock market returns as we see here drastically.
Absolutely. In addition to everything we covered with the appreciation of the value, that's kind of intangible. Like I mentioned, you can't really tap into that unless you sell or refinance, but the cash flow, it has increased. So every time we turned over the unit, which has probably been around like 3 times at this point, I was lucky with a 4-year tenant who we didn't really increase the rents. After that turnover, it was a couple $100 more. After the next turnover, a couple $100 more. So now that $1,300 rent when I bought the property is now $1,895, so almost $1,900, so $600 a month more. And annually, that produces $22,740 in rent currently. And so it's probably going to keep going up over time, which is amazing. And what's beautiful about that 30-year fixed rate loan that I got 9 years ago is the payment is the same. The payment has not changed a dime on the principal and interest, because that's just the nature of a fixed rate loan. So doing that, it eliminates the interest rate risk, right? Everybody knows rates have shot up, the past couple years. And, because I locked in that rate, that payment doesn't change. So it's a great thing. And my taxes have gone up a bit. I think they're, probably $300 or so more than when I bought it, which isn't crazy. And that's annually. So the taxes are about $8,400 a month. Insurance has gone up a little bit. Maintenance is roughly, a little bit more, but roughly the same. And the management is still 8% of the gross rents. So after subtracting today's expenses, that cash flow went from about $300 or so per month to over $800 per month, and now it's net cash flowing over $10,000 per year.
It's amazing.
So when you think about that initial investment of $31,000, this thing produces over 10 grand in net cash flow every single year.
Every year.
Which is, like 30% of that initial investment, which is fantastic.
Because of a decision you made 9 years ago.
Yeah. So I'm just, again, like I said earlier, I'm happy to be where I'm at. 9 years later, couldn't be more thankful of myself for making that decision and taking action and, taking the leap and buying that property and, eventually buying a lot more. But I didn't, obviously have a crystal ball. I didn't know that it was going to end up like this, but it's great looking back and just reflecting on it and, just knowing that, me taking the bet on myself, on, studying, on understanding what other people have done and understanding what success looks like, and then, following in those footsteps. Like I said earlier, I tried other business startups and I had other ideas, but real estate it's tried and true.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the oldest businesses around, and housing isn't going out of style. So just knowing that, like just using my head and really just going all in on that, like has obviously paid off. So really, really just thankful.
You didn't have a crystal ball, but looking at these numbers, it seems like you did have a hidden crystal ball somewhere. And so this property, it's not every property is going to be exactly like this, right? Some are going to be harder and more challenging. One thing that is important on this property, you picked a newer build as well, so it probably reduced the amount of maintenance. I think you were saying it was built in 97, around there. And
yeah, it was 2006. Yeah, so it was like a newer build. I bought it in 2015, so it was like 9 years old when I bought it. So I think it was the original owner. She had passed away in the house, and the people I bought it from bought it and then rehabbed it and then sold it to me. So it was newer build, lower maintenance. Just nice, solid construction, nice brick construction. There's a lot of brick houses out there in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, the cool thing is like we do still see deals like this.
Mm-hmm.
We still see deals that cash flow like this did, even with higher interest rates, and can produce similar returns year one. So, like I said, it's my only regrets are just not buying more back then. But we always like to say, the best time to buy real estate was 20 years ago, and the next best time is now. Next best time is today. So I'm sure in 9 years, I'm going to be very happy for every deal that I buy today.
And for anyone watching, right, we made this video for some specific people in mind and wanted to light a fire under their butts and give them some FOMO and really see, show them what's possible. There's a lot of people that speak with us, whether it's students, clients, colleagues, that know they need to be buying investment property and they haven't yet, for whatever reason. But seeing these numbers, anyone who's rational, who understands opportunity costs, I think this is going to be a catalyst for them in their life, because that's what we want to do here at Real Estate Skills. We want to change lives, we want to empower other people through real estate. Real estate's been able to change our lives. And really just show the numbers, peel back the curtain and show this real property. And there's dozens and dozens and more that we'll probably dive into and show, but why not start on the first one and really emphasize on how, once again, you're able to do this with a 9-to-5 job, a humble 9-to-5 job, still a solid 9-to-5 job, by being frugal, having great financial principles, and then bring those principles into this particular deal. And there's a lot of people making 60, 70, 80, 90, 100K a day that probably are spending way too much money on a monthly basis, that want to get into real estate and know they probably need to be saving more money, know that they need to be a little more frugal. Or maybe they are saving that money. Maybe they are in that similar situation and they're looking to you as a mentor, looking to me as a mentor. And this video is the catalyst where you listen to podcasts, you read the books, you listen to other people doing this same exact thing, and now look at where you're at today, helping and leading others and owning hundreds of units. So we hope that this video can be a catalyst for anyone watching, for you to take action. And Ryan, anything else you want to mention about this particular deal before we call it on this one?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on the cash flow. I'm not sure if we talked about where the value is today. So, I mean, what the biggest part of the overall return is, today this property is worth, according to Zillow, almost $320,000. So, bought it for $155,000. Now it's worth almost $320,000, so it more than doubled. So my $31,000 investment is now worth over $215,000. So that equity growth is, if you do the math, probably 5-6x that initial investment in 9 years, which is, more than I've seen with most other investments that, I've paid attention to. So, when you just compound all of this, it's just like how can I get my hands on more capital so I can buy more real estate, is where my mind goes. And then how can I, partner with other people to do more deals? How can I help other people do more deals and change their lives? Like this has changed my life, right? And this is one deal, and I own dozens of deals and that have had similar, returns and similar effects. So, it's one of those deals that, I might hold for a long time, but, now it's given me the options with, multiple 6 figures in equity in just this house that I can now, sell it. I can do a 1031 exchange, and I can park that in $1 million property, right? I could buy an apartment complex with that if I wanted to, or I can do a lot of different things with it. So it's the fact that I took action and followed the fundamentals, right? I got educated and let time do its thing, right? I want people to kind of see this and act with a sense of urgency, because the longer you wait, the less time you have for the compounding effect to actually take place, right? Time is the most valuable and important part of this whole equation, right? These returns didn't happen overnight. It happened over, 9 years, almost 10 years. So the quicker you are to get educated and, take action on buying your first rental or your next rental, start to build your portfolio, the better off you're going to be long term. So I just, encourage everyone to, just take some action, whether it's reaching out to us, if you have questions, if you need help getting started, or hop online, start looking at properties, start analyzing deals, do something that's going to help you take that next step so that, you're not looking back in 5 years and kicking yourself because you didn't take action and that you still don't own any rental properties, right? So, I kick myself for not buying more real estate, and I think every investor also does that, looking at, how things have performed and how they, it's looking like they will continue to perform for the indefinite future. So, just want everyone to, take advantage of the opportunities we have today. We're very lucky to, live in the United States with the property rights, the property laws, the financing available to us. There's just so many special things that I think we can take for granted just from being where we are, living where we are, and having the investment opportunities available. It's really just up to the individual to take action. There's nothing holding you back. You have the education available to you at your fingertips. You have properties available really on the laptop. So the only thing holding us back is ourselves. So just want everyone to take action and, just realize that the time is now.
So true, man. And you don't know where one property can take you. I think you depleted your savings in Tate Drive, and was a wonderful investment. And then you decided to go all in real estate. Then you just decided to get active wholesaling, get active flipping deals across the nation. You use that as a change in order to acquire more capital to get more deals, right? Because you ran into a problem. I need more money to get more deals. Yeah. And so if you're saving up your capital, you want to invest that nest egg into a great deal, then definitely follow Ryan's principles, our principles, in order to get your first deal. And once you do that first rental property and you want to learn how to create more of an active income through real estate, that's exactly what we teach, right? So we teach people who do have 9-to-5 jobs, who are high income earners that can invest right into real estate. Great. We'll show you the path. We'll help you out. But also for those that want to get started in real estate, want to generate an active income through real estate, through wholesaling and flipping, which we've been doing for years, that's why we have our webinar, right? Our webinar that we hold every single week, where we'll teach you how to build an active income in real estate and then roll that active income into buying rental properties just like this one here, so you can continue that compound effect, not only with your capital, but also with your learning, with your knowledge. Because when you're making an active income through real estate, now you're getting that transactional experience, right? If you wholesale a house, great. You're familiar with buying a property. You're familiar with the contracts. You're familiar with everything that you need to know in order to close an actual transaction. And so if you want to go ahead, check out that webinar. It's at realestateskills.com/webinar. We'll talk more about Ryan. We'll dive into what we do here. And we'll also put a link in the description as well. Ryan, any famous last words you want to say before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think it's all about creating your own luck, right? Someone could look at this and say, hey, Ryan got lucky. He just chose the right property, right place, right time. The time is now, and we create our own luck by getting educated and taking action. So I just think it's the better time than ever. There's never been a better time to get into real estate than right now. And I look forward to seeing everybody take action and sharing their success stories with us here in the community.